Buddy, how you doing? Today is Mother's Day. So, for those of you who were raised in a Christian home, I want you to go thank your mom. I want you to remember your mom. For those of you that had mother figures, especially in the church, I have one in particular that I'm very fond of. Her name was Floribel Allen. She was an indomitable force of nature because of some of the things I've seen her do. And she was a good Christian woman. But tonight, I want to talk about some of the women that were in the Bible. Because believe it or not, without the women that were in the Bible, Christianity may not have flourished the way it did. The Old Testament, you had Lydia, Phoebe, and Priscilla. I'm not going to really talk about them, but they were the main forces of the new church in their area. You can look them up if you want. But all of them dedicated not just their time, but their effort, their money, everything to keep or get Christianity up and going. They were teachers, they were givers, and they had a lot of courage and a lot of faith. This is what I want to talk about tonight. Those that I think were part of the movement, not just of Christianity, but also in the New Testament going forward. Okay? First one I want to talk about tonight, believe it or not, is Eve, because she was the first woman. Genesis chapter 3 and 20 says, Adam named Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. She was the first woman. Now here's the thing that you have to remember. We're going to go to 2 and 22. And then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of man, and he brought her to man. The man said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. God had made them for each other. Eve took responsibility for her actions. That's the main thing you need to remember. She started the downfall of man. Adam and Eve. But Eve was made out of Adam's side. Guys, listen to me. A woman is not made to walk 3 steps behind you. A woman is made to stand right next to you as your helper. You understand? She is designed to stand next to you, to help you and support you. You need to honor her as such. Understand? This is where we're going wrong in this country. Women, let me explain this to you. The man is supposed to be the head of the household. Now, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it should be. Here's a problem. Most men are not smart enough to realize that most of the time their wives are smarter than they are. So if they would stop and listen before they make the decision, life would be a lot better. But remember, woman is to walk next to you as your primary helpmate, as your companion, as your confidant, and as your guide, you might say. Why don't you give them a little voice here and listen to them before you put anything else down? But Eve is the first one I want to talk about. She was the mother of all living things. And I'm sorry I wasn't here this morning, but believe it or not, I was at Elko. Next lady I want to talk about, believe it or not, is Ruth. We're going to work our way forward, guys. And if you can't find Ruth, and if you haven't read it, you really need to read Ruth, because that will tell you about sacrificial love and what love actually is. A true Christian mother will sacrifice for her family, and they do. I have to look back at my mom. My mom sacrificed almost everything for her family. Understand? Ruth sacrificed because of a famine that was going on around Bethlehem. Naomi, Ruth, her husband, and Naomi's other son and daughter-in-law moved. Well, when they moved, both sons had died. So Naomi was a widower, Ruth was a widower, and the other lady was a widower. Naomi decided she was going to go back to Bethlehem. That's where her original family was. Ruth tried to tell both girls, you need to return to your homes that you came from. The one lady did. Ruth, on the other hand, told her, he said, wherever you go, I go. So Ruth sacrificed her own family to actually help Naomi. She actually gleaned the fields for food to survive for her and Naomi. Now later she did marry Boaz, and life got a lot better. But she sacrificed, and she had faith that God would see them through, and he did. Very simple. He did. Her faith in what God could do is what saw them through. Now here is what is so important about Ruth also. She was an ancestor of David and of Jesus. That's important to remember, because the lineage had to progress. Okay? So, one of my favorites, Hannah. You go to 1 Samuel chapter 1 and 2 to read about Hannah. It's very important to understand this. Hannah was married to a man with two husbands, or two wives. His name was Elkanah, and he had two wives. Well, Peninnah, his one wife, had kids. Hannah was barren. And every year, he would go to Salem to sacrifice. And all of them would go up there with him. But when he did, he felt sorry for Hannah, because he would give her a double portion. One, because he loved her, And number 2, because the Lord had closed her womb and she could not conceive. 1:11, it says, and she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. That was Samuel. He was a Nazarite. It's important to remember this. She prayed for a son, and God gave her Samuel. And she dedicated him to God when he turned about 3 years old. He was weaned. And he lived in the temple as a child, and he became a prophet and a judge. That's very important to remember. Her sacrifice and her faith of waiting on God, she turned him over to Eli, the head priest at that time at Salem. 21, in chapter 121, it says, her husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vows. Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, after the boy is weaned, I will take him, present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Well, this went on. When he was finally weaned, they went up there. Hannah made a very beautiful prayer in chapter 2. And then in 2:11 it says, when Elkanah went home to Ramah, the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. So Hannah kept her word. She let Samuel be raised in the temple under Eli to teach him, to turn him over to God, so he would be God's prophet and judge. This is important because you have to remember at that time, after Eli departed, Eli's sons were very wicked. Samuel kind of took over. But this is also the time that Israel decided they had to have a king. So Samuel, under what God had told him, ordained Saul as king. Later, as Saul messed up, Samuel went in search of another king. If you remember, he went to the house of Jesse. And he looked at all the sons and said, no. And he said, surely you have one more. Well, that was David. He said, that's the man. He's going to be the king. It's important to remember this because without Hannah's sacrifice, Samuel would have never been there. So the tribe of Israel, we don't know what would have happened to them. God put these women in place at the right time for the right reason. Their sacrifices and their faith made the difference. Okay, guys, another one. If you haven't read it, especially ladies, if you haven't read about these women, you really need to open up your book and study them. Ruth. The book of Ruth, or Esther, I'm sorry. We just got done with Ruth. But the book of Esther. King Xerxes I, his first queen was departed, shall we say. She refused an order from the king. So guess what at that time? Okay? Now, Mordecai is the one that used to teach the king's harem how to act and how to be a lady. But here's the problem. Esther was a Jew. And at that time, the Jews weren't looked favorably in the King Xerxes' court. So Mordecai told Esther, said, keep your heritage a secret, or it will not go well with you. But there was a plot to destroy the Jews. We're making this a quick reference, guys. You really need to read the book. There was a plot to destroy the Jews. It was found out about. Esther came forward and told Xerxes about her heritage. She was a Jew. He stopped them. But he also had them terminated. Okay? Esther had found favor with Xerxes at that time, and she was made queen. And when the plot was uncovered to kill the Jews, she pleaded for her people. And in that area, the Jews lived, and they lived safely and comfortably because she was willing to sacrifice herself for her people. If not, she was willing to die alongside her people. And that's what made the difference with Mordecai, or with Xerxes. You have to understand, these women all took a part in what is called Christianity of today. Because without their help and without their lineage, Christianity may not have flourished. Okay? Now there's other ladies in the Old Testament that need a little bit of recognition too. There was Jochebed, which was Moses' mother, and Miriam, which was Moses' sister. Because if you remember, Moses' mother put him in a basket and put him by the reeds, and the Pharaoh's daughter found her. But then Miriam came up and said, hey, I know a woman that can nurse him for you. So Moses still had the raising of the Hebrew from his own mother inside the palace of the pharaohs. Isn't that funny how God works sometimes? He was taught and trained and educated by the Egyptians, but he still had that calling of the Hebrews. That's why all the turmoil that was inside of him when he killed the slave, guard at that time, and he fled to the desert. You have to understand, he was still searching for his own identity of where he was. He wasn't really an Egyptian, but he wasn't really a Hebrew because of how he was raised. I'm pretty sure Jochebed had a lot to do with that and the way she raised him, because she probably told him the stories of where they had come from as an infant. But he also was raised by the Egyptians and educated. That helped him out immensely. Miriam could have died. Jochebed could have died. Moses could have died if Jochebed wasn't brave enough to do what she did. She had faith God would see it through, and God did. There was a reason for all these things to happen. Rachel was Jacob's wife. She needs to be mentioned just because she bore the nations that were to come. Okay? Now, you've already heard me talk about Lydia and Phoebe and Priscilla. You can find them in the New Testament. The other one I need to talk about was Mary Magdalene. in the New Testament before I move on. Mary Magdalene was a one that was released from the demons, but she was the helper of Jesus. She looked after Jesus while he was here on this earth. She helped him. You got to remember, there's other Marys that were there too. But who was the first one to the tomb on Sunday morning? That was Mary Magdalene. She was coming to get the body ready. Instead, she found out he was already risen. And the angel talked to her and said, "Why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? He's risen." And she told the disciples that men didn't want to believe. We're hard-headed at times, man, I swear. Okay? Here we come into the New Testament. This is what I want to get to. Go to Luke. Elizabeth was the mother of John the Baptist, and she was faithful. Her and Zacharias were both deemed as righteous in God's eyes because of their faith. They were looking for the Messiah. Read Luke chapter 1 if you want the full story. But Elizabeth found favor in her older age, beyond age of being able to bear a child. God blessed her. Gabriel came and told Zechariah what was happening. And he became silent. He was a priest. But he became silent because he had a different name picked out for the child. And Gabriel said, "You'll call him John." He could not speak any farther until they went to dedicate John the Baptist. When he said his name, John, "What name do you give this child?" he could speak again because he bowed to God's will and said, "We will call him John." Here's a cool thing. Elizabeth was a descendant of Aaron. You got a lot of powerful people there, guys, in that lineage that keeps on coming out for some reason. Okay? One last one I want to talk about, and that is Mary of Nazarene. Some people will call her the Mother Mary. And this is what is so important. Mary, when she was betrothed to Joseph, was probably around 14 years old. And the angel Gabriel came to Nazareth to tell her. Let's just read it. Luke 1:26. In the 6 months of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and the angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Guys, I got a question for you. She was only 14, 15, and this happened. What would you think if you were told you were going to give birth to the Son of the Most High and it's going to be God's child? Most women would be petrified at that age. But see, here's the thing. God intervened. Gabriel was quite busy because he also had to go talk to Joseph too and let him know, hey, no, this is good. This is a good thing going to happen. But have you ever stopped to think what would it be like to raise the child of God? Mary had to be very favored by God. She didn't say no. She didn't try to back out. It was like, okay, let's do this for my God. Her faith would see her through. Her faith. Here's my question for you. These people stood up in the thought and the idea of actually death because of what they did. They could have been dead anytime they talked. All of them. Ruth, Hannah, all of them could have been persecuted right then for what they did, but their faith saw them through. Mary could have backed out. Elizabeth could have said no, but they didn't because of their faith of what God did. I have this question for you. These people could have died for their belief in their faith. We are afraid just to be called a coward or called something funny just because of our faith, because we are a coward that will not open up to other people. What does it take for you to just tell a stranger, hey, God loves you. He's waiting on you. If the door opens, step in. The New Testament ladies that I told you about, any of them could have faced persecution in the new church for what they believed. But yet they held steadfast in their belief, and they put God first, and in their faith, they knew that God was going to take care of them. Where have we come? We've forgotten this. The women are the ones in the Bible that held it together. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm going to tell you, my mother is a great inspiration to me. She raised us kids, and my dad was at home, but he worked on the river, so he was home at 30 days and off 30. She basically raised us kids by herself. She was the disciplinarian, but she made sure every day that we were well fed, we were taken care of, and we were clean. And she also made sure up for a long time that every Sunday we were parked in that pew. Now, when they had children's church, we didn't go running down either, because my mom told us, you're old enough to be here, you're old enough to listen. Listen. My mom knew what was happening. She was steadfast in her belief, and she kept us there until we were old enough to make our own decisions. And I applaud her for that. What are we doing today? These people could have died, and we're afraid just because, well, we might be 5 minutes late, or we might not get there, or, you know. We don't even come. Why? It doesn't matter. Sunday is God's day. That's the day that we are to praise and worship God every day. But Sunday is dedicated just to God. So why don't we do it? Why don't we tell others? Are we afraid of getting ridiculed? What is it? I don't know. I know if somebody opens up the door on me, I'm going to put my foot in it real quick. And I'm going to see where it goes. Because here's the thing. You are responsible for planting just as many seeds as I am. Someone else will be responsible for doing the harvest. But the cool thing is, God gets all the credit. Because it's only by His workings that we can do it. Ladies, if you're watching, and guys, if you really want to learn, get into the ladies of the Bible and see what you find out about them, how steadfast they were, how honest they were, how much that they loved God and were willing to sacrifice anything and everything for them. Okay? It will do yourself a favor if you do. With that, guys, I'm going to tell you good night. God bless. If you're ever in this part of the country, please come by and see us. I was not here this morning because I was at Elko. I will not be here next week because I will be back at Elko. And then in June, I think I have dates at Saratoga, I believe. So if you're ever here, please come by and see us. Dean's always here, which is a cool thing. But yeah, God bless and good night, man. Keep your faith.